in the heart of North London, where vibrant Turkish bakeries sit next to betting shops and corner stores, something far darker has taken root. Streets once defined by family-run businesses and Friday market chatter are now the backdrop for a shadow war, a brutal feud between rival Turkish gangs fighting for control of the UK's lucrative heroin trade. The names may be unfamiliar to most Londoners, the Tottenham Turks, the Hackney Bombasilla, but their violence is not. In August 2023, a 9-year-old girl was shot in broad daylight in Dalston, caught in the crossfire of a botched gang hit. It was a shocking moment, one that brought the feud, long whispered about in police briefings and immigration court transcripts, into the public eye. For authorities, it wasn't just a gangland dispute. It was the British front of a transnational drug war stretching from London's back streets to the ports of Turkey, the mountains of Kurdistan, and the clubs of Amsterdam. Behind the headlines lies a network of family ties, betrayal, tradition, and revenge. This isn't just about profit, it's about pride, history, and blood. And at the center of it all is heroin, the engine behind a silent, ongoing war, while its trade fuels a modern mafia war tearing through one of Europe's most diverse cities. To understand how we got here, we have to go back, before the headlines, before the shootings, back to when the first Turkish crime families arrived in London and set their eyes on power. The story of London's Turkish gangs doesn't start with drugs or guns. It starts with migration. In the 1970s and 1980s, waves of Turkish and Kurdish immigrants arrived in the UK, many fleeing political upheaval, military coups, or economic collapse. They settled primarily in North and East London, forming close-knit communities in places like Tottenham, Hackney, and Stoke Newington. At first, these were families focused on survival, opening cafes, textile shops, and kebab houses. But the economic hardship that pushed many to leave home didn't disappear upon arrival. For some, especially young men, opportunity seemed scarce, and crime offered a faster route to money, power, and respect. As second-generation immigrants grew up between cultures, a few drifted into the margins. By the late 1980s, Turkish-run organized crime began to emerge in London. The Arifs, a powerful Turkish Cypriot family, quickly rose to prominence. Known as Britain's answer to the mafia, the Arifs operated out of Peckham and were linked to extortion, robbery, and later drug trafficking. Their name became synonymous with the first wave of organized Turkish crime in Britain. Meanwhile, in Tottenham and Hackney, smaller gangs were forming, some aligned with regional Turkish identities, others along Kurdish or political lines. The seeds of future feuds were planted early, often imported from generational conflicts back in Turkey. What unified these groups was their access to an emerging heroin pipeline. Turkey, already a key transit hub for Afghan opium, was perfectly positioned. London gangs with direct ties to families back home could tap into the supply, bypassing middlemen and creating a powerful competitive edge. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, these gangs solidified their grip. They weren't loud, no headlines, no flamboyant shows of wealth. They operated in the shadows, fluent in the languages of both street crime and family honor. Their violence, when it came, was targeted and precise. By the time law enforcement began paying serious attention, Turkish gangs had already entrenched themselves in the UK's criminal economy. They weren't just one of many. They were building a new power structure, quietly anchored in the underworld of London, and ready to explode. Heroin is no longer the drug that grabs headlines, overshadowed by cocaine, synthetic pills, and social media-fueled fentanyl hysteria. But make no mistake, it remains one of the most profitable and deadly drugs on the planet. And for Turkish and Kurdish gangs in London, it's been the backbone of their criminal empire for decades. Unlike street gangs that deal in grams, these organizations operate by the kilo, importing raw product directly from the source, cutting out middlemen, and moving it across borders with the efficiency of a corporate supply chain. Afghanistan produces over 80% of the world's opium. From there, the heroin moves through Iran into eastern Turkey, often controlled by Kurdish trafficking syndicates with long-standing smuggling traditions. The infamous Baybashin clan, once led by Hussein Baybashin, helped build the routes in the 1980s and 90s, connecting Turkish labs to the wider European market. The drugs travel west through Bulgaria, Serbia, and Hungary, along what law enforcement calls the Balkan route, before entering the UK via major ports like Dover and Felixstowe. Once in Britain, the shipments fall into the hands of networks like the Tottenham Turks and Hackney Bombasillar. Their advantage isn't just territory, it's trust. They're often dealing with family or tribal ties back home, making their networks hard to infiltrate and incredibly loyal. There's no markup from third parties, just pure profit. In London, the heroin moves through a tiered distribution system. At the top, gang leaders rarely touch the drugs themselves. Instead, they manage a web of sub-dealers, mules, and stash house operators, many of whom are teenagers or recently arrived migrants. Some are paid, others are coerced, some are addicted and working off debts they'll never clear. The economics are staggering. 1 kilo of heroin, imported for under £10,000, can fetch over £40,000 on the street once it's cut and bagged. Multiply that by monthly shipments, and you're looking at multi-million-pound operations, often run from the back room of a garage or a flat above a kebab shop. But that scale brings attention and violence. As the market grew, so did competition. Smaller Kurdish groups splintered off, forming rival crews. Albanian outfits, already strong in cocaine trafficking, began eyeing heroin routes. Inside the Turkish scene, power struggles broke out. The Tottenham Turks pushed for control, the Hackney Bombasillar pushed back. What started as business became deeply personal. Betrayals, accusations, and power plays turned a profitable trade into a gangland battleground. Heroin wasn't just a product anymore, it was the spark in a growing fire, and that fire is still burning. The feud didn't begin with a gunshot, it began with a slight. Some say it was over a shipment that went missing. Others claim it started with an unpaid debt or a disrespectful remark at a funeral. A few trace it all the way back to Turkey, to old family rivalries transplanted into new soil. Whatever the spark, by the mid-2010s, 2 names became staples in police intelligence reports: the Tottenham Turks and the Hackney Bombasillar. Both groups were formed by second-generation British Turks, young men raised in the UK, but shaped by codes brought over from Anatolia: honour, reputation, retaliation. But their approaches couldn't have been more different. The Tottenham Turks were calculated and hierarchical, modelling themselves on the structured discipline of older crime families like the Baybashins. They saw violence as a tool, not a language. Control was their priority, of territory, of reputation, of fear. The Bombasillar, by contrast, embraced chaos. Their name literally means the bombers, and it fit. They were impulsive, media-savvy, and aggressive. Where Tottenham's crew preferred silent intimidation, Hackney's crew wanted to be seen. Their weapons weren't just guns, they were Instagram videos, flashy bikes, and veiled threats in rap lyrics. And then came the blood. Shootings erupted across North and East London, in Edmonton, Dalston, Stamford Hill. In one incident, a teenager was shot outside a bakery. In another, a stray bullet paralysed a bystander waiting at a bus stop. But it was the 2023 Dalston shooting that truly rocked the city. A 9-year-old girl struck in the crossfire. She survived. Public trust didn't. Police say the hit was intended for a Hackney gang member. The Tottenham crew is believed to have planned it. But the outrage that followed came not just from law enforcement. It came from within the Turkish community itself. This wasn't just criminal. It was a disgrace. Funerals became war zones. Mourners in bulletproof vests, armed police watching from cars, eulogies interrupted by threats. Online tribute videos turned into digital battlegrounds, comments flooded with insults, footage used as bait. A generation of boys, many still teenagers, started claiming blocks the way soldiers claim hills. By 2024, the death toll wasn't just rising, it was going international. Bodies started turning up in Spain, Germany, even Moldova. The feud had become mobile, its violence exported. But its heart remained in London, where the front line ran through postcodes and playgrounds. Today, the streets of Tottenham and Hackney carry a tension you can feel. Shopkeepers close early, locals walk faster, and police vans linger on corners just a little longer than before. This is no longer a turf war. It's a war for legacy, for dominance, and for revenge. And no one seems willing to back down. What began as a turf war in North London has grown into a transnational conflict, stretching far beyond the familiar postcodes of Tottenham and Hackney. Today, the battle between Turkish gangs isn't just fought on British soil. It's playing out in cities across Europe, leaving behind a trail of bodies, fear, and unanswered questions. In July 2024, the brutal scope of that expansion became clear. Izzet Eren, a senior figure in the Tottenham Turks, was gunned down in Chisinau, Moldova, a city far from his usual circles. To the untrained eye, it seemed like a random act of violence, but to law enforcement, it was unmistakably an organized hit, part of a growing feud that no longer respects borders or jurisdictions. Eren was no small player. First arrested in the UK in 2015 for firearms offences, he served time before being deported to Turkey. But instead of fading away, he became a transnational coordinator, a fixer who helped oversee drug routes from Eastern Europe to the UK, moving product through Cyprus, Greece, Bulgaria, and beyond. His killing, experts say, may have been retaliation for a disrupted shipment or a message to others in his network. And Eren's death is not an outlier. In Spain, several members of a Turkish trafficking ring were arrested in 2023 following the discovery of 300 kilos of heroin and cannabis in a warehouse near Valencia. In Germany, a shooting outside a Turkish restaurant in Hamburg is believed to be linked to the same London-based factions. And in the Netherlands, police have reported a spike in arson attacks and targeted kidnappings connected to the broader feud. The common denominator: heroin routes and power vacuums. As UK police crack down at home, gangs are exporting their violence to more vulnerable regions, places where law enforcement is under-resourced, where ports are porous, and where local criminals are willing to work with whoever pays best. Cities like Antwerp, Rotterdam, and Barcelona have become critical hubs for staging, storing, and repackaging drugs before they're smuggled back into the UK or across the continent. International agencies are now sounding the alarm. Interpol and Europol have flagged Turkish gangs as rising threats, particularly for their organizational discipline, ethnic cohesion, and global connections. In some cases, they're now seen as rivals to Albanian, Italian, and even Balkan syndicates who traditionally dominated European heroin markets. This raises urgent questions for British and European authorities alike. How do you police a war when the participants hold dual passports, operate in 5 languages, and treat borders as mere suggestions. This isn't just a London problem anymore. It's a European threat, born in backstreets, but now moving through airports, highways, and ports with frightening ease. And the more international this feud becomes, the harder it will be to contain. For years, the violence unfolding in North London operated in the shadows, understood by police, whispered about by residents, but rarely making headlines. The gangs involved were known, the turf lines were drawn, but arrests were scarce, and convictions even rarer. Witnesses stayed silent, often out of fear, and many locals simply resigned themselves to the danger. That changed after the Dalston shooting, when a 9-year-old girl was struck by gunfire meant for a gang rival. It marked a tipping point. It wasn't just another criminal incident. It was a line crossed. Politicians condemned the attack. Media coverage intensified, and public pressure forced authorities to act. The Metropolitan Police launched targeted operations, ramping up surveillance and patrols across Tottenham, Hackney, and Haringey. Armed response units were deployed. Dozens of search warrants were executed. Known gang affiliates were placed under surveillance. Arrests followed, on firearms charges, drug trafficking, money laundering, and more. But officials admit that enforcement alone has not broken the cycle. Many of these networks are tightly organized, culturally insulated, and well-financed. And when one figure is removed, another quickly fills the gap. Some localized programs have emerged in response, offering vocational training and early intervention for youths deemed at risk of gang involvement. These efforts, while limited in scale, aim to reduce recruitment at the grassroots level. But critics say they remain underfunded, fragmented, and inconsistent in their results. What's more, community cooperation with law enforcement remains limited. In some cases, cultural ties and internal pressures discourage reporting or public condemnation, and years of mistrust between some ethnic communities and the police have made meaningful collaboration difficult. Authorities now face a dual challenge: tackling a hardened criminal infrastructure while re-establishing control in areas where gang presence has become normalized. The stakes are high. The longer this feud is allowed to fester, the greater the risk of further violence on the streets of London and beyond. As of 2025, the Turkish gang landscape in London remains volatile, fractured, but far from finished. Leadership is in flux. The murder of İzzet Eren left a vacuum in the Tottenham crew, with multiple lieutenants vying for control. In Hackney, sources say the Bombasılar are splintering, with younger members forming offshoots or shifting allegiances to other ethnic-based networks, including Albanian and Somali groups. With no clear kingpins, the feud has become harder to trace and harder to predict. The heroin trade itself is evolving. More gangs are turning to poly-drug operations, adding crack cocaine, counterfeit benzodiazepines, and cannabis into their portfolios. Logistics are adapting too. Encrypted messaging apps, crypto wallets, and untraceable burner phones have made prosecution even more difficult. Some insiders warn the violence is merely in a temporary lull. The chaos that erupted between 2015 and 2023 was cyclical, spurred by personal vendettas, perceived slights, and control over distribution routes. Without serious intervention, history may repeat itself, only deadlier. Others are more hopeful. The community response to the Dalston shooting triggered a wave of new grassroots efforts, some focused on youth diversion, others calling for transnational cooperation between British and Turkish authorities to disrupt the flow at its source. But as of now, no one is truly winning. Not the gangs, not the police, and certainly not the neighborhoods caught in the crossfire. There's no defending it. The violence that's erupted in North London is the result of choices made by men who valued money, power, and status over the lives of innocent people. They weren't forced into this. They weren't without options. They built empires on heroin and left blood in their wake. This isn't about poverty. It's about greed. The gangs tearing through Tottenham and Hackney have shown no regard for the communities they hide within. They've turned neighborhoods into war zones, children into collateral, and culture into camouflage. For years, they operated under the radar, shielded by fear, silence, and a warped sense of loyalty. But the truth is clear. They are criminals, not cultural figures. Predators, not protectors. And while failures in policy and policing helped create space for them, no amount of social context excuses the trail of bodies they've left behind. Now their world is cracking. Police pressure is mounting. International eyes are on them. But the damage has already been done. Families have been destroyed. Streets are marked. Trust has been shattered. The question now isn't whether justice will be served. It must be. The question is how long it will take to rebuild what they've broken, and how many more will suffer before that work begins.